What is B2B commerce? I mean, this is both a proper noun, like a special Salesforce service, and also like a concept. And blurring those two can be confusing, but even understanding one of them can be confusing. And there's a whole bunch of terms around B2B commerce that have both a technical meaning within Salesforce B2B commerce and also have natural English meanings, and then also other technical meanings for specific use cases. So the
Mm-hmm.
terminology is easily to get confused around here. Salesforce likes to name things in like a really generic way because they're sort of like claiming the space, right? We are B2B commerce now. But there's no, that doesn't help understanding necessarily. So we're here to talk about like what these terms really mean, what is B2B commerce, and we'll be using examples from our own experience from, so how many years is it, Jonathan, you've been doing B2B commerce implementations back when it was Cloud Craze?
Oh, back when it was Cloud Craze, I guess if you're gonna add that in there, it's almost gonna be, well, it's definitely 9 years, almost almost 9.5 years. That's a long time.
That is a long time. Yeah, and probably commerce itself has changed a lot, and we'll maybe get a chance to talk about that in this or future episodes too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
especially
definitely.
now. But
Yeah, and to talk about B2B commerce, one of the reasons I thought it'd be a good topic is when I know I'm talking to, prospects or even customers that are on B2B commerce, the term is a little, sometimes can be odd to them. Like, what does that mean, B2B commerce? Because it doesn't always explain exactly all the intricacies, right, that are involved. But that, it's just selling stuff online, right? Like, what makes it B2B commerce? And really, why is it a whole separate thing? Why is there a B2C versus a B2B?
do these people actually? I don't usually get involved at that stage of the like prospecting, right? But so do they have preconceptions typically of what B2B commerce is? Like I know that at the technical side, we run into organizations that have a really clear idea of what they want, whether they consider it B2B commerce or not, and other organizations who have no idea what they want, but they know, oh, I
Mhm.
want B2B commerce, whatever that is. So like, do you notice patterns in their preconceptions, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, some obviously do. They know they want B2B commerce. They've already done the due diligence, and they've been, reading online, and they've sort of found their way, to talking to like a Salesforce AE, and then getting involved and understanding like what it is, right? Which is at the core, right? You're selling items or services through a digital experience, and it's for your B2B buyers. Contracting that to B2B commerce, sometimes that's not the first thing people look for. I think if they're going to go on Google, and just search up like, they're trying to figure out the problem they're trying to solve, right? They have items, and I think what they tend to look for is something like, maybe like a partner portal or a B2B portal. I still hear the word portal used like a whole lot even today. Um, and they
Yeah,
don't
that's
think
an
of
old
it.
term. Like 20
It is.
years ago, like enterprise portals were big, right?
Mhm.
Uh,
Correct. But people still are. I still hear that. I think I was on the call just yesterday. Someone was calling it a B2B portal. Because I think in their mind they're thinking, okay, you log in. Maybe there's almost like a SharePoint online spreadsheet, and maybe you're filling that out. Um, So why they get confused? Why is it called B2B commerce? Like, what's the difference between that and just having like an old portal that you log in and fill out you know, some sort of request for the products? Why is that? Um,
right. So I guess what Portal is capturing here is the idea that they want there to be a kind of a one-stop place for customers, for their customers to start accessing stuff that has to do with the relationship that the customer has with the supplier, with the provider, or something like that. And that's
mhm.
not necessarily, so that's a little bit more broad than just a way to order stuff online, it seems to me, right? Even though B2B commerce is mostly
Right.
about ordering stuff, there's a little bit more than that. There's also like maintaining knowledge about the order and the shipments and stuff after the fact. There's having accounts, having contact information, maybe having contact forms, or sometimes even like claim forms or return information or something like that. And I guess to me, Portal
Mhm.
captures that it's an entryway to more of those things than just buying online. Because you don't have most of that
Hmm.
stuff on like Amazon. Like you can look at your previous orders, but there's not a lot of detailed like management of my current state my special contacts at the provider, stuff that consumers don't have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think, there's a lot. I think, like, for example, I remember being at Dreamforce one year and being in line with a group of people, and Salesforce themselves were giving a talk about how to structure your B2B commerce teams, implementation teams. And I remember this one individual was in line in front of me, and there's some other people that me and Noe Tames from our group was also in line, and so this person in front of us was saying how excited they were, like, there's this new product, B2B Commerce, and that he wanted to learn about how to implement it. And I remember asking him, oh, well, does your company typically do commerce projects? He says, oh no, we usually do like Community Cloud. Okay, Community Cloud, all right. Cool. And I said, well, it's a little bit different than Community Cloud. I mean, it's not on the same, hardware stack, or sorry, that's just software stack. And there's a lot more involved. The things you're naming, for example. That's why I thought of this. And it's just a lot more complicated. He's like, oh, well, if it's built on communities, so it should be easy. If you can do communities, it's just like creating a storefront. I'm sure there's just like a few widgets you drag and drop, and then and you just have a storefront, and it just works. And I said, well, I mean, maybe a simple, like, kind of like a B2C, right? Like, you have a product or some products, you're going to sell them to the exact same sort of people with the exact same price, and maybe, but this is a lot more complicated. And I remember sitting there in the meeting afterwards, and they were explaining all these different concepts that you were just going through just a very small list. And I remember looking over, and that guy looked really overwhelmed. His eyes were huge. Like, he had realized that, I think he had realized that how complex it was. It's a whole other level to me than sort of standard B2C, selling to a normal consumer.
Yeah, I think when you use the word e-commerce, immediately your own personal e-commerce experiences come to mind, which is something like Amazon or Etsy or whatever. And those are a lot more simple than what you probably know is actually the case if you're involved in actual B2B buying and selling. So all that, like, negotiations about specific prices, about different quantities, about time periods for different prices, about special things that have to be done pre and post order processing, that stuff is probably in your head as a person who's doing B2B, like acquisition, let's say. But it's probably not in your head when you hear the word e-commerce. Amazon goes into your head, and then you're like, oh, it must be as simple as that. And for me, one of the things that's proved to be extra, at the conceptual level, extra tricky to get across to even to customers who are fairly savvy, is that tension between the simplicity that you expect from e-commerce, from the user's point of view, and the actual business complexity. That means that software is a very good tool, including custom software is a very good tool for this sort of thing. So that, for me, the first thing is the word e-commerce is kind of turning on little things in your mind that are maybe misleading. And even the UI is probably turning on little things in your mind that are maybe a little bit misleading. But what do you think? Is that, do you see that too, or like, is that a fundamental kind of confusion source, or what? What is the basic confusion source that you see?
Well, I mean, the confusion, yeah, I think is exactly that. I mean, in fact, I was going to lead in with, the idea of probably why Salesforce and others call it B2B commerce versus something else, is because the idea is that tension you talked about. The idea is to take something that was normally like a portal type experience or whatever, where you go and you maybe click on a widget to do some sort of buying, and click on another widget to maybe get a quote or set up a new contract or whatever it is, right? Like, that was your portal. But the idea was to take like things or ideas that were in the B2C world, that buying experience it's very easy, right? People are used to going to Amazon, other websites, they're out there, and buying things very easily. You have like one-click buy, and you have simple reordering, all this stuff, right? And how do you bring that into the B2B buyer experience? And to me, that's why they have B2B in commerce, right? It's to take that, what you said, the the commerce experience, and pull it together with what B2B buyers want. But there is so much complexity. There is that tension. It's like, people want to add more capabilities, but then it makes it more difficult on the standard commerce experience, and then you're having to then maybe automate some of that or make it more simplistic to compensate for the complexity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so maybe we can go over a few examples of the kind of complexity that comes in B2B, and then maybe try to abstract from that a more general principle of what's distinctive about B2B versus B2C or direct consumer or Amazon style commerce. I have some like lower level sort of technical examples. You might have some other examples too, either from lower level technical projects, which I know you've worked on a lot, or some of these more recent like higher level conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can start with some examples and then come up, because I have a thought on some way of capturing the general deeper difference between B2B and B2C commerce, but I think starting from examples is better.
Yeah, do you have any examples in mind?
Yeah, so I can think of like in this one client we worked with. So the end goal was to have a list of products. People needed to be able to see what they could purchase. But it turns out the company is the seller is a manufacturing company. And many customers have custom part numbers or custom SKUs. Many customers also have multiple different part numbers that they can use individually as a company to refer to the same SKU from the manufacturer's point of view. Also, sometimes the manufacturer will manufacture custom parts for a specific order. So the customers can actually input they're not just configurations, there's certain specifications that will actually result in a different state of the factory. So the factory actually has to physically do different things based on inputs that they get from the customer. They wanted to automate all of this stuff, and ultimately they wanted it to turn into basically a page that's a list of products. And then also some additional configuration work and some that's very, very specific to the nature of the physical products produced. What this resulted in was even at the domain model level, complexity that is irrelevant to a consumer that's buying a pre-purchased product, irrelevant to somebody that has even a custom price list, let's say, which a lot of B2B customers will, and also that depended on that needed to get information about like the physical state of the factory at the moment. So that involved integrations not just with something like an inventory system, let's say, or a high level like ERP system, but with something much more low level, like literally where are the different devices. And that service was already available because it was actually used for internal planning. But so we had to translate this all to what looked like an Amazon page. And that meant we had to make decisions immediately, like, well, so when we're trying to model this data, do we model it in a very clean way so that our internal representations inside B2B commerce really map pretty nicely, like one-to-one onto the domain reality? When we do that, you run into things like, well, performance considerations, because one other expectation of Amazon is that it happens like that. And as some of you may know, Amazon actually was one of the leaders in inventing useful columnar databases, which had been more like theoretical and used for highly specified like analytics purposes. But they invented they started using columnar and like eventual consistency approaches to databases because for consumers, for the scale they were acting at, consumers really, really expected something incredibly fast. And Salesforce, you don't get to just create your own database system, right? You'd have to build an external system for that. And also the database system in Salesforce it's a relational database. So performance, you're very, very narrowly stuck in certain areas. You have to kind of balance the desire to take this very high complexity of the domain with the fact that the consumers, i.e. the actual B2B buyers, are expecting a Amazon-ish level of performance, and give it to them so that it's easy to use, but also as powerful as it needed to be. So we ended up creating something like, I think, 14 custom tables for this customer, custom S objects, Salesforce objects, and who knows how many different classes to handle that kind of logic, which, as you know, if you've done these sorts of implementations, that means that there's a lot of making explicit things that maybe never had been made explicit before. And we can talk about that later too, about the business requirements, difficulties of developing a B2B commerce implementation for someone that hasn't done that before, but it's a little bit on the more specific side. So that's my first example of high domain complexity that you would not imagine in the consumer application of e-commerce. But you have something in mind?
No, I was just going to keep talking about that one, maybe if that's okay. Like if it's the customer I'm thinking of, I mean, if I'm following you, I think one of the issues that that customer had was like, so a normal sort of a B2C or simpler B2B commerce site or storefront, the products are pretty, or can be pretty, I'll say like non-changing or pretty specific. But whereas I think for yours, they had like a product that came in rolls. Is this the same one where they
Yep.
had, you could get like up to the is it millimeter of this product even? Can't remember. There's a certain amount that you could
Fractions
get.
of
You
an
could
inch.
get like
Yeah.
fractions of an inch, or you could buy what, like buy roll.
Yeah, so in other words, the actual units there were some just like straight off the shelf units. Like I just want like 10 of these that are like 50,000 feet long.
Mhm.
But then there were some others that were completely custom, and you had to be able to handle both of these.
Mm-hmm. And see, to me, that's a very interesting, the custom aspect. I mean, I know, and I'm going to probably do this a lot, juxtaposing the B2B versus B2C to help with it. But like, I think B2C, if you go on normal Amazon and you see a product, then there's like certain layers, right? There's the complexity. There's, okay, a standard product, you see what you like, you buy it, you're done. Some you go, there might be like, let's say a t-shirt, you have the same t-shirt, but maybe multiple colors. That's a very simple version. Others, right, you have like maybe something you're kind of building, so you kind of buy, like, I think of like maybe a site where you build a computer and customize it. So you're like, okay, I want this hard drive, I want this memory, kind of, we go to apple.com or Dell, whatever. And those start lending into the B2B type complexities. But even these to me go even further, right? I mean, imagine you're like wanting to build a computer, but you then want to like really, you don't want to just buy like 32 gigs of RAM or 64. You want to be like, oh, I want to add just a few, something really extra custom, because every B2B buyer is different. So trying to fit that in there. But in your case, right, or this customer's case, yeah, something you could get down to like the fraction of an inch, because you never know, you might need it.
Yeah, and so I think one thing you're getting at there is you were listing some different types of complex products that Salesforce B2B
Mhm.
Commerce does provide support for out of the box, which is pretty significant set. And then when we're doing custom work on top of that, we're going to go potentially way beyond that. I think one thing that I also noticed that maybe is an issue that arises when you're doing those sort of detailed configurations that you don't usually have to worry about in the B2C is sometimes because of the way your own manufacturing processes or just usage of your own supply chain works, sometimes your customers, if you have a B2B store, really do care about like where something is coming from physically or where it's being manufactured physically, because that can affect not just how quickly it gets there, but it also can affect the paperwork that's involved.
Mhm.
So the legal side of it, some sort of like chain of evidence or not evidence or just of whatever is needed to track the status of something in their supply chain. And so you have to worry not just about like what the count of inventory available is, but where it's available, who it's available, what the existing relationship is between a particular customer, let's say, and the source, or even, and this is a different customer I'm thinking of, what the specific routes are that your own delivery systems, your supply chain actually takes. Because you're in a B2B context, you're planning things logistically at a scale that if you're just doing B2C, maybe you can just let the post office worry about, right? But if you're doing
Mhm.
B2B, maybe you don't let the post office worry about it. Maybe you run your own like delivery system, your own trucks. And so I remember in one project, we actually had to also factor in when allowing users, not allowing users to buy specific products, but when allowing them to select specific delivery dates, we had to factor in what the actual truck routes for the delivery system that the seller had implemented according to their who knows how complex logistic plan was. And that's the thing that, again, I can't even imagine. Like that's the post office problem normally for B2C, but B2B
Mhm.
sometimes you have to worry about that too.
Right. Yeah, I remember one of the projects. There was the customer had the client had different distribution centers. If I'm remembering correctly, you could add a few things to your cart that you're going to order, and then and this is actually another B2B complexity, right? If you buy something on Amazon, you want it to maybe ship to yourself or ship to another location, but in B2B you can buy have a list of items that you're gonna order, but you need some to go one location, some to go another, and then there's delivery costs of that. And I think one of our customers had the complexity was even more because they had different distribution centers. So we had to figure out how to keep the cost down, like you said, the different routes, right? So you had to look at what was in the order, and then figure out, okay, well, these could be shipped from this distribution center because they're picking this, destination for these, but these other list of products that are in there are going to this other destination. So you use, a combination of the distribution centers. So just to be like very complex after all to kind of automate that, to me, which is back to what makes it powerful, because if you're to not have these systems, right, again, the sort of push and pull of the commerce versus the B2B buyer experience, right? You have all these complexities, and maybe before they'd have to figure things out after the fact or whatever on how to fulfill the order, but being able to have it automated, so you have less people involved and the system kind of takes care of it. It's all designed with an algorithm. And then all right? All is you ordered a list of items, and I know I want these to go this direction, this go the other direction, and the system takes care of everything else for you. To me, that's what makes the B2B and the commerce work together pretty nicely.
Yeah, and you're moving to a little bit of the bigger sort of enterprise transformation level here a little bit, because you didn't quite go this far, but you suggested a little bit about how automating these kinds of complex matchings of what you have available and what people need that are more complex for B2B involves doing things that people otherwise have to do, right? And when you're going to shift around activities from something that is done manually to something that's done in software, that's not just a technical problem, that's a problem of like, well, what do I do with all the people who used to do these other things? Or how do I change the processes that really depended on people, but tweak them a little bit so they don't depend on people, but the process itself has to change. And this is something I think we often encounter, is that companies that we run across that are going to implement Salesforce B2B Commerce, not always, but often this is part of some bigger enterprise transformation, like going digital, broadly speaking. Often that's started in an internal way, but B2B Commerce is maybe the first time or one of the biggest ways that they are suddenly moving the digital transformation to something that faces their customers directly. So I don't know exactly. Yeah, I was going to say this is a the concept of enterprise transformation is around like forever. Obviously, I don't know, forever. I don't know, at least 20 years, I guess, 30 years,
yeah,
probably.
Something like that.
But right, but Salesforce is one of the things that people like about B2B commerce in our experience, or in my experience, is that because Salesforce started out as a customer relationship manager, as a user individual focused thing, whereas a lot of existing enterprise software was really about like managing resources. E-commerce is a little bit more individual and personal than that. If fundamentally you want to treat your buyers as people, as individual people, rather than just like sinks of product, then Salesforce, where you have one record for a user or for a contact, is a really kind of exciting natural way to do that. And this is their whole, like, what is a customer 360 platform or something, right, that they've been talking about recently. Does this come up in these like earlier level conversations much? Like, are people talking about, oh, this is part of enterprise transformation, or is this more like what I encounter when we have to talk to some other architect in some other system and they're changing things while we work on it?
No, it comes up. I mean, I think not everyone, when I'm on kind of the front, I have I know we have sales people, but I'm also involved, and I try to be the voice sometimes, trying to pitch the concepts, because everyone's got they're all at a different place, right? Their understanding of what Salesforce B2B Commerce does, what is possible, what what they think it is, and you have to kind of figure out what it is they think it is first. But so some of them, they're just barely getting over the concepts of of what it is. They still think, well, they're surprised when they see it. It's like there's a shopping cart. They think, well, it's not a spreadsheet. But if you're, I think lucky, then you get to a point to where they do realize, you talk to them, and they start to realize that it is a digital transformation type effort, and if you're extra lucky, you get to them to a point where they realize, like what you said, because ultimately, all these or most customers have some sort of ERP system, and a lot of them either have it in Oracle or they'll have it in SAP, which is a very popular one. And SAP has their own, right? They have like SAP Hybris and everything else. But it's like you said, it's the people side. Like, to me, one customer, this will get to the heart of what you're trying to ask, I think. One customer said that they need a better solution because they basically took, like, whatever they had with the ERP system, I think it was SAP, and they said to get a product, in there and to kind of create an order on the back end for on behalf of, like, these customers, it's a long process. It was, like I said, designed for imagined resources. And so when they decided to kind of open it up to allow their customers to come in and buy these, these B2B buyers to buy products, they said that the buying experience was just as tedious and awful as it is for them, because it was basically the same system. So getting them to realize that, while yes, SAP and whatever ERP system like Oracle, while that's sort of necessary, that people are demanding or expecting a better experience. And to me, like you said, that's where Salesforce comes in, that experience layer of, like, okay, you're not managing resources anymore. I mean, you are at one level, but right, people don't need to worry about that. You just need to have a good experience for the customers to buy products from them, and get rid of all that complexity, if that makes sense. And like you said, having that like contact record in Salesforce and the whole customer 360, right? Now you have people not worrying so much and working that ERP sort of level, but they can now work at a higher level of abstraction, I'll call it, and they can see with their eyes, like, there's a customer, they made these orders. You can maybe even see if you're in a far enough roadmap, down the line where you have maybe something like Pardot and everything else working together, you can see all that together. You can see what they've been marketed, what they bought. You can run, analytics, and I'll kind of stop there. But I mean, to me, it's a user experience on top of that sort of infrastructure. We've kind of evolved into a better place, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the things about you're talking about experience and the user experience, and you're talking about, actually, I think, on both ends, the buyer's experience, and then also the, like, internal either salesperson or admin's experience or marketing person. You mentioned part of that experience. I was thinking one thing that seems is nice about using Salesforce as a platform for B2B commerce is that in Salesforce you both know, like, what the company that made a purchase is, so what the, like, economic relationship is, but you also know who the individual is, and you can track the individual across multiple companies over time over the course of their career. And from what I know from people who do, like, are B2B buyers or B2B marketers, the individuals you deal with actually matter an awful lot, not just the companies you're dealing with. So, like, there are a lot of different suppliers of X, right? So who's gonna, somebody wants X, well, there's a tendency for them to at least start with the other people they know who have purchased X, whether or not the person who's buying X is that company A or company B or company C. So they're like, oh, okay, who do I know that makes good X? Oh, well, this person makes good X. I don't care who I'm buying for. I'm actually bringing part of my expertise, part of my value as a buyer is the relationship I have with this specific company A. And if you're only tracking who your, like, sources of cash are for the sake of the single exchange, right, the purchase you're making, and not tracking the people too that are doing that, and if it's not seamless and easy to do that, then you're actually not in your software system, information system, you're not capturing a real part of B2B buying, which are those, like, individual relationships that the buyers and the sellers and the marketers have. So it's not just, so it's, I guess, customer as a person, but the customer in customer 360 is both a company and a person, right?
Right.
In Salesforce. I sound like a Salesforce commercial now, but but I like the fact that you have those relationships cleanly set up in a distinct way.
Yeah, it is nice. I was just thinking, that's where, so years ago, when I first got into working on the Salesforce platform, I mean, historically I worked, like, in 2000, year 2000 is when I got involved in working e-commerce at Walmart.com, and we were kind of battling that with Amazon back then, and still are. They still are, but I moved on, right? And and then when I saw what Salesforce was doing, and one of the reasons I wanted to get involved was their focus on the customer and that CRM. And I remember people, and still today, right? People were like, well, why do I need a CRM? Why do I need to track stuff? I keep it all in my head, or I have my email, my inbox, I have my address book. But people these days, and actually we do as a company as our Sixth Street and our relationships. To me, it's about the people, right? So you try to have that good relationship, not making it transactional, not making people feel like they're just a number and they're an account number or whatever. And the way you do that with the CRM is like keeping in touch. Are you having enough touch points throughout, whatever the cycle is, a year, a month, quarter? Are they meaningful touch points? And, the CRM helps you, I think, even though it is a little bit automated, it definitely does improve the relationship. And so that's why, years ago when I started working on Cloud Craze, which became B2B Commerce for Salesforce later, at that time people were like, why the heck would you have e-commerce on top of Salesforce? Like, it doesn't make sense. People didn't get it. But I remember thinking at the time, like, well, yeah, it makes sense. Like, you have all this information there, you already have that relationship extended out, right? You have a customer, so you must be selling something. Like, why is it separate? Why have all these integration points? Why not kind of put it together? So definitely, it accomplishes a lot, right? You have, the experience level, like we were talking about, and then you have it down to the individual and the relationship. Because ultimately, even though you're purchasing on behalf of a company, like, it's the person who's buying, right? People, and I tell people this, and not to jump around a lot of topics, but I tell people this at our company, like, part of e-commerce is like emotions and psychology, right? People buy things, and brands because they have an emotional connection to them. I mean, some of them you have to buy because your boss told you need to order 1,000 units because of whatever reason, but there's also a little bit of emotional connection. Why do you buy Reebok versus Nike, or why do you buy, Coca-Cola versus Pepsi or whatever, right? There's that emotional brand connection, and you get that when you get on an individual level, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny, actually, you mentioned the emotional connection. I often enough find on these implementation projects that within the companies that are implementing B2B commerce, there's often like a sort of like maybe like old school group of people who are like, the customers don't care about anything like branding or nonsense or images or prettiness or anything like that. What they really want is they're happy with like a big old DOS screen that has 40 fields, and they'll fill it out because that's what they do. And then, like, often later in the project, some like marketing people come on and they're like, no, we have branding requirements, and B2B commerce can implement all of those things. So we end up implementing both the presentation side, the emotional branding side, and also the functional business logic side. But it does often seem like there is tension in a lot of companies between those two groups for B2B purposes, because that the need to do the emotional brand personal level connection is actually relatively new, I think, for B2B commerce, because B2B e-commerce is like where individual buyers are actually just like sticking stuff in their cart and checking out like they would at Amazon. That's pretty new. So I just noticed that tension. Not everywhere, but it's definitely a significant majority of the time in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's always there's a couple topics in there. I'm not sure. One of them is like, I've seen Salesforce talk about this themselves, and I remember seeing it when I was at Cloud Craze. They will talk about when you work on these projects to make sure you have all the right people involved from different departments. That's why it makes them complex. If you were to work on a sales cloud instance, standing up or improving their processes, you're probably dealing with the sales team. If you're dealing with something like with Marketing Cloud or Pardot, then you're probably mostly working with the marketing team. They're kind of siloed. But when you deal with the commerce, and then B2B commerce especially, there's a whole lot of stakeholders involved. Sales is actually impacted a little bit, right? They need to have some involvement because it's the buying, at least most of the projects have to do with like self-service commerce, and how does interaction between the sales team, transition over to, the buyer on their side to have self-serving and buying things based on a contract that was put in place when they're working with the salesperson. You got the marketing aspect, right? Like you said, the tension about how things should look, what kind of promotions there are, spotlight products, whatever, right? You got their involvement. You got IT involved because there's systems that have to be put in place. The ERP people, you got payment processing. It's. I think a lot of people get overwhelmed when they think, oh, it's just on Salesforce, and I'm talking about other partners and customers, because they think it's simple, like you're just installing a storefront. It's just just a few web pages. How hard could it be? But you won't really be successful unless you get all those stakeholders together and that tension sort of relieved. It's a big people problem. Our opportunity, I should put a positive spin, you know what I'm saying?
That's right, yeah. Yeah. No, actually, one of the things I most enjoy about B2B Commerce projects is that inevitably, if you're working on one of these projects, even if it's supposed to be a purely technical role, you end up learning a lot about the domain, about whatever it is that the seller is selling. You can't treat B2B commerce stores as little like widget stores. I've never had a project where it's just straight up like, oh, this is the SKU, that's it, you're done. You always have to, in order to even model the product, even if you're using out-of-the-box functionality, you have to understand not necessarily how they're manufactured. Sometimes you do have to understand that physically, but like how they're supplied, how they are sold, how they are promoted, how they're discounted, what the salespeople's relationship is, which often depends on the nature of the product. Like, does the product have a certain specific shelf life? Do they have to push it within a certain period of time? So we often end up like going like deeper and deeper into like the whole business side of whatever the person who's the company that's trying to sell something online in a B2B context is doing. Whereas I think, again, I haven't actually, like, you have worked at Walmart, I haven't worked at like a consumer e-commerce site, but it seems to me that in those cases, you've got like product and variant, and your system design can kind of deal at that level, right? You don't have to know that much about like paper towels and beans in order to create a Walmart e-commerce store, I think. But maybe you can correct me on this. I'm probably exaggerating here. Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, when I worked, about on the IT side, I didn't worry too much about all those details. You just need to kind of know. I mean, like the categories you had to be in, and but ultimately though, like I said, the variants. Ultimately though, as you progress, it gets a little bit more, I think, complicated. And for the most part, when I was there, I didn't have to worry about that part too much. Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, but I guess I'm actually thinking, it feels to me like, I don't know if this is really true, but there is sort of a B2C newish thing that's reminding me of the complexity of B2B commerce implementations, which is all of these like automatic pickup or like quick drive-through grocery store things, where you can put groceries in your cart, but then the store has to manage in very real time what the state is. They also have to figure out what things count as substitutions for what other things. They have to have some way of tracking, communicating with you in real time. Stuff that is specific to the product, like how long can it be refrigerated in a box that includes non-refrigerated things or something like that. That isn't really an issue if you're just running a grocery store, isn't exactly an issue if you only sell stuff that can be shipped. But it's very specific to the nature of the thing being sold, and that's reminding me a little bit more recently as I use a lot of these services of B2B commerce in general, where you have to get into the specifics of the thing being sold and the relationship to the buyer, as opposed to just, it's a widget.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you're touching on a subject this might be a whole other recording or session, but recently with COVID-19 and everything else, I've seen a lot of changes with buying groceries that you were mentioning, and things have been getting a little bit more complex. And I've seen, it seems like grocery stores and maybe other companies that sell food have to, especially grocery stores though, had to innovate rather quickly. You know, they had certain things already in place. The ones that were selling food online for delivery, and now there's all these options. Like, do you leave in the store, you know, the door step? Is there alcohol involved? Do you have to get like someone's ID? How, you know, the scheduling, how many slots are there? So it's not just the product now, it's like the delivery mechanism, how many people are available to deliver, how far away do they have to drive? Like, there's all these things that are more complex now that don't think quite existed a while, or a few years ago, and especially now I've seen a lot of changes. And what I've heard, and well, it's not just heard, but I've seen, is that usually what happens is you'll see a lot of innovations in the B2C side, and you kind of see what works and what doesn't, and you know, whatever else. And then what happens is B2B on that side, they will start taking notice, like, oh, that was interesting innovation. How can we use that on the B2B side? If that makes sense. There's a lot of complexities on B2B that don't exist, but there's a lot of like, especially the user experience, I think would carry over, if that makes sense. So I'm curious what's going to happen in a few years if we'll see some of that.
Yeah, and I think part of that is besides the logistical part, there is the fact that a user experience or like an individual, the store for e-commerce has to have so many possible paths through it, so many different ways of exploring, so many ways of discovery, rather than I as a salesperson can take a call from you and I can walk you through knowing what you want and what quantities and all of that, which is how typically a B2B commerce relationship works. When you have e-commerce, and this is a thing that B2C stores that like Walmart.com has been doing for a long time, or Amazon, their UX has to make it relatively easy for you to navigate a huge number of products, right? Maybe each individual product is not that complex, but to walk through the catalog is not hard to search and to filter and set favorites and stuff like that. And that means that a lot of the like brain work that used to be done, or that is still being done, but in many cases is only used to be done by salespeople, now has to be somehow like formalized, introduced into the code, introduced into the software implementation. And that means that, and again, actually, this is my experience too. I don't generally consider myself like a UX designer, but as a technical architect, you end up having to think about UX too, because the very, very open-ended like discovery exploration path of the user can affect lots of other things, lots of other technical decisions. And often in my experience, the sellers themselves have never actually had to think through the complexity of discovery and exploration because they always relied on their salespeople to handle all that. And that can be that's a lot of mental work too, to like zero in on what the customer actually wants or needs. We can get into at some point into Einstein on B2B commerce too, which I haven't actually worked on, but I think that's just another direction of the whole friendly B2B commerce, friendly e-commerce experience that Salesforce B2B Commerce already has been doing, leading the customer through these complex paths. And this is the thing that, again, when the tension I talked about before between the old school kind of like product and sales people versus the marketing people, I talked about the marketing people as like requiring branding and stuff, but they also have a stronger sense of that full how to offload cognitive work from the user, from the customer into the system in a way that I guess salespeople don't necessarily, because their job is to handle that cognitive work themselves. And that means it can be fun to talk to marketing people about like, well, what are the salient features of this product that have to be available and visible, and who needs to see these versus who should these be hidden from in order for the discovery to be intelligible for the correct user. I don't know much about that personally, but you encounter it and have to work on it anyway.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing we're having these sessions because there's a lot to talk about. I mean, I think a lot of these topics will probably spawn out into like others as well. But you know, I've talked about the experience before and how important it is because of what you said. Like, you know, you're taking something that maybe a sales team was involved in, but now you have to somehow put that in a way that people can just come in and find, search, filter, you know, exactly what they're looking for and find information about it as well. If it's, you know, B2B, it's like data sheets and things like that. And maybe you want to have reviews, but people want to, you know, have as much information to make a purchasing decision. And the user experience is pretty important. And I've seen some customers that don't want to put much attention to that. They just want to take what's out of the box and kind of just apply logo changes and some color changes, which is just fine as a start, right? You gotta start somewhere. But really, right, like how do you know if you're maximizing the potential of your buyers finding what they need? And I think and there's ways to do that with analytics and stuff. We'll probably talk about that in another point. But what I've seen, pretty consistently, every B2B project I've been on, customers tend to buy more once there is an actual B2B commerce storefront or experience put from. And I've heard actually other partners kind of scoff, like, what's the big deal? I mean, if a company was going to buy like whatever 100 units of this product in the month of June, for example, well, they were going to buy it anyway. Having a different experience is going to make them buy more. But actually, what we've seen through analytics is that they actually do. They buy a whole lot more, and almost every company I've seen that's went from maybe not a complete B2B commerce solution to something like on Salesforce. I've seen I won't go out the exact numbers, but I've seen everything from like 150% on the low end to I've seen some over 400% on the high end in sales. It's like, well, how does that happen? I mean, if they had to buy those 100 units, why would it go up so much?
Is there downstream more stuff made or used?
Yeah, well, you would think, right? Why that doesn't make any sense, but I have my own opinions. I mean, part of it, right, is creating less friction. They say that's people buy stuff and there's less friction, right? So this is my personal opinion, but I think someone could probably comment about this. Might be a good discussion point. But you said before, when people are buying, it's not so much what's important. The account is important, but the person themselves is important, right? And people are, are creatures of emotion, and if I have to go, let's say I have to buy 100 units of this product from this partner of ours, for example, I'm gonna just try to pick something random here, mugs. I'm gonna buy some mugs or whatever, right? So I'm gonna buy 100 units of mugs, but then I also have to during my day buy maybe 1,000 sort of cardboard boxes, and then I have to decide, which one am I gonna do first? You're probably gonna gravitate towards the two different companies, right, with two different buying experiences. You're gonna probably gravitate towards the one that's very easy to use. You can do it on your phone, on your tablet, day or night, and you're going to kind of push off and procrastinate on the one that makes you hate life, if that makes sense, right? And so you have to order that, but you're going to do it less. And so I think incrementally over time, it's sort of, that's my personal opinion, is that because of our human psychology and everything, you're going to procrastinate and you're going to gravitate towards the one that has less friction, that is pleasing to the eye. You're going to want to use it more, and so you're going to do it more often probably. Even though you have to still buy some number of units, you're going to keep pushing that one off to like maybe the last minute, whereas the other one, like, oh, it's the first day, I should probably order these. I'm going to order them, and then maybe I'll just add a few more in there too, because why not? And to me, that's I think what probably happens, but it's hard to really tell. I mean, unless we start doing interviews. But for sure, though, if you look at the numbers, if the buying experience is good enough, then they buy more, and that's kind of that's a proven fact.
Yeah, it would be interesting actually to in a future conversation to bring in somebody who actually works in those numbers like every day, about the difference between pre-e-commerce, post-e-commerce for B2B purposes. Maybe somebody who either at their own company or maybe has looked at a number of companies and knows does that vary by like product type, by like business domain broadly, by like maybe the age of the company or the size of the company. I can imagine that was making differences too. Because individually you get a little bit of visibility as an implementer, but there absolutely are people who are like, I didn't know the numbers you just mentioned, but who are like really deep in the numbers, who you think it's worth spending a lot of money for for like a big enterprise transformation, which includes some B2B commerce implementation. It's not just, in other words, like an empty, I assume it's not just an empty, like, oh, we must go digital for no reason at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll talk about that in the future. That would be fun.